Hello everyone and welcome back to Posey 3D Studios. In this video we are making Miles Morales versus Spot. This model is from NomNomFigures. Now this is an older model and it's not currently available, but I'm sure with enough requests he may be persuaded to re-release it. I've been wanting to do this model for a while and I'm glad that now that I can do it, I'm able to share it with you. So here we go. I started out priming him in a white primer. I then painted him completely in mummy robes to give him an off-white base coat. Then I used matte white from the top and everything for the highlights. I didn't really go for a darker undertone like grays or anything because I was afraid that that would actually take away from the effect that I'll be going through later with the spots. Miles' very simple color scheme as well. Used black primer, went over that with matte black, and then mixed a little hive dweller purple with the black to go over the highlights on him. Painted the logos and the stripes on his suit using Vallejo Vermilion Red. It took 2 or 3 coats. I could have went over all this with a white before, but I didn't want it to be too bright, so I just went with the reds and sucked it up and did it. One thing I want to mention before we get too much further in this video is that you'll notice that I didn't use the entire base that came with this model. I actually made an edit to the portal that the entire model is standing on and added my own custom wall mount. I did this for 2 reasons. 1, I'm running out of shelf space, and 2, I thought it would just be really cool to have the main portal floating in space. You'll see it at the end of the video. Let me know what you think in the comments. Now for the cool stuff. Spots. I use Muso Black. This stuff is wicked. It absorbs 99.6% of visible light. That means you literally paint a void in space. You don't want to use this for your normal blacks just because it literally pulls all the light into it. But for this character, I couldn't resist. It had to be a void, and I really like how it turned out. Muso Black is an acrylic paint, so it's water-based. You can thin it with water. In fact, later on, you'll see I spray it through an airbrush. Once it's dried, it has a velvet-like texture, and you cannot varnish this. Why? Because if you varnish it, varnish reflects light that you're trying to absorb, and it just ruins and kills the effect of the paint. I really love how NomNom created these spots where they're not just little outlines and they're not protruding, they're actually inset. Once we get to the end, when you can see where this stuff is dried, you can look at his face and it literally looks like it's just open and hollow inside. It's just an amazing effect, and in real life it's way better than any photo or video can give it justice. One other thing that I did is around some of the spots there weren't any little splatter patterns, so I added a few of those of my own just for added effect. Alright, now for the spots. I mixed some clear resin in with acrylic inks. I used lemon yellow and blue to begin with to go around the edging on these. I've seen this model where it was white around the edge and that didn't pull it off for me. When you look at the movie that this is in or any of the comic references, there's like a weird transparent color around it. It's not just flat white. So I wanted to mimic that. Turns out the yellow is too transparent, so I added orange to it to make it a little more opaque so that you can actually see the edge around this, because once I put the Musso black on the spot, I mean, it really just makes this entire thing pop. It's an amazing effect. Once I had painted on, I cured the UV resin and flipped it over, did the other side, did the other spots. There was more than just these two. I didn't feel the need to show every single one of them because they were all done the same way. One thing I did here that don't want to say I regret doing, but I wouldn't do it again, and that was paint the entire, or brush some of the resin across the entire model. Totally unnecessary, not needed, didn't help or take anything away, but just not something that I needed to do. I could have just went around the edges, because once I put the Musso black on, you don't see any of the surface anyway. And as you can see on the main base, I didn't even use the clear resin. I just used Green Stuff World candy ink and painted around the edges. I wanted this one to be a little more opaque, not as transparent, just because it's the main base and I wanted it to stand out a little more. You flip it over, paint the other side. Remember, if you're trying to mimic this, paint both sides. Now it's time for my favorite hobby tool, masking putty. Do you have yours yet? What are you waiting for? There's a link in the description for where to get this stuff. It's fantastic. So I use a sculpting tool and my fingers to get this all around the edges, cover up the wonderful paint job that I just put on those, so I don't mess it up with the Musso black. The sculpting tool came in real handy to get the little splatters out from the edges. These are places where the portal will be that's kind of out in space. Like I mentioned before, Musso black is an acrylic paint. It can be thinned with water. That makes it flow through an airbrush super nice, and the effect it pulls off is just, like I said, the video and pictures do not do it justice. You have to see it in person. Before it dries, it will kind of have a wet look and have some shiny spots in it. Those go away once it's dried. Also, if you're doing something transparent, you definitely want to flip it over, paint that other side as well. Don't let any light bleed come through and mess up the effect. After it had gotten dried to the touch, removed all the masking putty and started doing touch-ups. You can kind of see some glare on it here. That's where it's not fully dried. It took a good 24 hours to fully cure, but it was dry enough for me to handle, remove the masking putty, and do the touch-ups without having any problems. I mean, just look at it here. It looks like there's a hole in the desk and I'm just painting around it. Insane. So this model has several little tentacles that are holding the other little portals up and attaching to Miles and to Spot. What I did is, where those connected, I obviously didn't paint the tentacles so that I could glue and use resin to cure those together. I painted the tentacles in matte black, and once the glue and everything dried, I went over those with Musso black to conceal the shininess of the glue and the resin, and kind of blended that into the tentacles, so when you look at it once it's all together, it's like these tentacles are literally coming out of this voided space and then changing color. It really looks awesome. Now everything's dried on Spot, time to finish him up. I go over all the tentacles with matte black and kind of blend some of the Musso black into those as well, so it's not a stark contrast between the two. I did go over these with a brush to varnish these areas before I did the Musso black, because again, don't use varnish on Musso black. It ruins it. That wraps these guys up. With help from the DJ, it's now time for glamour shots. Again, this model is from NomNomFigures. It's not publicly available anymore, so you'll probably have to ask him directly to get this particular model. If you like what you see, please consider liking and subscribing. You can also find me on Facebook and Instagram. Would love to have new followers there. Consider joining the Patreon as well. Paying members get access to me through Discord, where I share advice on life, love, and occasionally 3D printing and painting. I also personally guarantee that as a Patreon member, I will not steal your money for a custom model that never gets produced. Like the other guy that has a regional accent similar to mine, but isn't quite the same. Thanks to all my current supporters. Love you guys. You push me to do better every time. See you guys next video.